Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've been tasked with exploring something that's really the bedrock of modern medicine, the foundational safety framework for giving medications.
Mm.
We're taking a look at Chapter 4 of Focus on Nursing Pharmacology, and our mission is to pull out those critical insights that, prevent errors and actually make treatments work.
And it's a framework that's under a massive amount of pressure today. I mean, think about the context you're working in.
Right.
Patients are older, they have more chronic issues, they're sent home from the hospital sooner, and they often show up having already Googled all their symptoms.
Which can be a good thing or a very, very bad thing.
Exactly. Sometimes it's empowering, sometimes it's just dangerous. But it always means your process has to be completely solid, systematic.
So we're talking about the thing that connects the sort of compassionate art of nursing with the hard science, the pharmacology, the chemistry.
That's it. And the tool for managing all that complexity is what we call the nursing process.
Oh.
You can almost think of it as like a proprietary operating system for healthcare.
Huh.
It's not a rigid checklist. It's a problem-solving method that ensures care is safe, efficient, and, holistic.
It has 5 core steps.
5 core steps: assessment, nursing diagnosis, planning, implementation, and finally, evaluation. It's a loop.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, where all safety has to begin. Assessment. This sounds like just collecting data, but the source makes it seem like it's much more than that.
Oh, it's the most leveraged step of the entire process. Without a really accurate baseline, everything else you do, the diagnosis, the plan, the treatment, it's all built on sand.
And when it comes to drugs specifically, where are the biggest vulnerabilities in that baseline?
It's almost always in the patient history. That's where the hidden dangers are.
So what's the kind of high-risk information we absolutely have to get during that history?
Well, you're looking for anything that could cause an adverse effect or an interaction. So you start with the obvious things like chronic conditions.
Like kidney disease or diabetes.
Right. If a patient has renal disease, their body can't eliminate the drug properly, so they might need a much lower dose to avoid toxicity. But then you have to dig deeper into their actual drug use.
And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because patients don't always remember everything.
They don't, or they don't think it's important. The biggest hurdle is getting them to tell you about non-prescription therapies. We have to ask, specifically ask about prescription drugs, yes, but then also over-the-counter drugs, herbal supplements, alcohol, nicotine, and even caffeine.
Because they don't think of their daily ibuprofen as a real drug.
They absolutely don't. They won't mention St. John's wort, which is a huge problem for interactions. And those omissions can be clinically and sometimes dangerously significant.
So it's an interviewing skill, not just a checklist item.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another detail you have to pin down is allergies. You need to know, was that skin rash a true immune system-based drug allergy? Or was it just a predictable side effect like nausea? That changes everything for future prescriptions.
The source also talks about the psychosocial side of the assessment, things that seem like they'd predict if the patient will actually follow through at home.
They are the quiet killers of compliance. First you have to figure out what they already understand so you can teach them effectively. But remember, stress and illness make it really hard to learn.
Sure.
And then, crucially, you have to ask about social and financial supports. If a patient can't afford their medication, they aren't going to take it, period. Knowing that during the assessment lets you plan an intervention, like getting a social worker involved.
So after the history, we get to the hands-on physical exam. We hear a lot about dosing based on age and weight. What's the nuance there?
A standard dose is almost always based on a 150-pound adult. So right away, you have to be thinking about the extremes.
Children and the elderly.
Exactly. With children, their liver and kidneys are still immature, so drugs can build up to toxic levels really quickly. And with older adults, it's the opposite problem, with similar results. Decreased blood volume, slower GI absorption, their receptors even change how they respond. They're just inherently more sensitive to drugs.
So you have all this data history, allergies, physical findings. How do you turn that mountain of information into an actual strategy?
That's the next step.
Right.
You can't treat the problem until you define it. That's the nursing diagnosis.
So it's a synthesis of all that data.
It is. It's a statement that identifies the patient's actual or potential problems from a nursing perspective. So for drug therapy, a diagnosis might be something like risk for injury related to drug-induced dizziness.
And that diagnosis then drives the planning.
Right. Planning is where you prioritize, you set goals. For drug therapy, the goals are almost always the same 3 things. Get the good effects, minimize the bad effects, and make sure the patient gets it.
So all of this prep work leads to the big moment, Implementation, putting the plan into action. This feels like the point of highest risk.
It is. This is where a simple mistake can have a tragic outcome. The source breaks it down into three parts: proper drug administration, comfort measures, and education.
Let's start with administration. There are the famous 8 rights, but with all the pressure on a hospital floor, does anyone really hit all 8 every single time? Where do things usually break down?
That's the critical question, isn't it? The 8 rights: patient, drug, storage, route, dose, preparation, time, and recording. They're not just suggestions, they're the absolute standard. But under pressure, some are definitely more fragile than others.
Which ones are the highest risk?
I'd point to 3. First, right patient. The system fails when we get passive. You have to check the wristband, yes, but you also have to ask the patient to actively state their name and birth date.
Not just, are you Mr. Jones?
Never, because a confused or hard-of-hearing patient might just say yes. The second one is right dose. This is where math errors and visual mistakes can be lethal. There are 2 transcription rules everyone must know. Never, ever write a dose, starting with a decimal point. So not $5 Texmel, but CO5 Texmel. That little zero prevents a 10-fold overdose.
Oh.
And conversely, never use a trailing zero. Writing $5 Texmel is dangerous because that decimal can be missed, and it gets read as $50 Texmelby. Again, a 10-fold error. These tiny details are life and death.
That really brings it home. Okay, what's the third high risk, right?
For recording.
Oh.
The rule is simple. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. But the key safety issue is when you write it down. You only document after the drug has actually been administered.
Not before.
Never before. If you chart it and get pulled into an emergency before you give it, the next nurse will see your note, assume the patient got the drug, and skip the dose. Or worse, the patient gets a double dose later.
Okay, so beyond just giving the drug correctly, implementation also includes comfort measures.
Yes, and this is about ensuring compliance. It can be as simple as helping the patient manage side effects. Providing support, a positive attitude. That's the placebo effect, and it's real. It can actually improve outcomes.
You also mentioned lifestyle adjustments. Can you give an example of a drug that requires a really tough change for the patient?
Oh, absolutely. Think about bisphosphonates, the drugs for osteoporosis.
Yeah.
A patient has to take it on a totally empty stomach and then has to sit or stand upright for at least 30 minutes.
And if they don't?
They can get terrible esophageal burns. So you can't just tell them the rule. You have to explain why the rule exists. You make them a partner in their own safety. That's what drives them to actually do it.
That makes sense. It's about empowering them. This leads us right into the next section, patient education. With patients going home so much earlier now, this feels like the final safety net.
It is the ultimate defense against errors at home. You're essentially training the patient to be their own quality control manager.
So what are the key things they absolutely must know before they walk out the door?
There are 8 key elements. You give them a written list. Name of the drug, the dose, what it does. You give them specific timing instructions, special storage instructions. And this is critical, a list of which over-the-counter drugs or herbal remedies they have to avoid.
And you also have to tell them what to do if things go wrong.
Yes. They need to know the warning signs of toxicity. They need safety advice, like not driving if a drug makes them dizzy. And very importantly, they need to be warned not to just stop taking certain drugs suddenly because the withdrawal can be dangerous.
Now, the source brings up a report from the IOM about medication errors, and the numbers are just shocking.
They're staggering. The report estimated that somewhere between 44,000 and 98,000 people die in hospitals each year from medical errors.
Wow.
And it costs the system over $21 billion a year. This isn't just about individual mistakes, it's a massive systemic failure.
So the educated patient becomes the last line of defense in that broken system.
They are the final vital check. That's why they need to have their list, know what each pill is for, and feel empowered to speak up and say, hey, this pill looks different from what I got yesterday.
And for parents giving medicine to kids, the margin for error is basically zero.
It's non-existent. A small overdose for an adult might not do much, but in a child, it can be profoundly toxic. Parents must know, never use adult medications for kids, and always, always use a proper measuring device for liquids, not a kitchen spoon.
So when an error does happen, how does the system learn from it?
Through reporting. There's a national reporting system run by the U.S. Pharmacopeia. It's how we spot trends and fix them. A great example is the drug Omicor. It's an omega-3. It kept getting confused with Amicar, a totally different drug.
So what happened?
After enough error reports came in, they changed the name. Omicor is now called Lavazza. That's the system learning and making a proactive change to protect future patients.
Which brings us back around to the final step in the process, evaluation. This is the feedback loop.
Evaluation is what makes the process a continuous loop instead of a straight line. It's the point where you stop and ask, did our plan work? You're constantly checking for the good effects, looking for the bad effects, and seeing if any new interactions have popped up.
And the results of that evaluation might send you right back to the beginning.
Exactly. You might need to change the diagnosis, which changes the plan, which changes the implementation. It's a truly dynamic process.
So if we boil it all down, what's the main takeaway for you, the listener? It seems the nursing process is really this structured but flexible operating system that lets us handle all the complexity, the science, the tech, the human factors in giving drugs safely.
It's the framework that separates hope from hazard.
A perfect summary.
So I'll leave you with a final thought to mull over. If we agree that this whole process is a continuous loop of checking and rechecking, what do you think is the single most vulnerable point in that entire chain? And more importantly, what kind of system change, something beyond just telling people to be more careful, could really strengthen that weak link?
That's a great question to think about. Thank you for sharing your sources with us and for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.